This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello, this is Breach Burke. Before we get into this week's podcast, I would like to thank my patrons personally. Politi, John H., Tanya T., Veronica S., Jeffrey B., Gabby, Helen M., Sunny H., Scott K., JRM, Susie G., Eldritch Priest, B. Lupita, C. Roberts, Jeanette, DS, Jake B., CDV, Allie, Thaddeus G., V!V, Mary Beth R., Ida B., Eric N., Tana, May, and Gold_81. I really appreciate those of you who have joined recently and who have stuck with me over these years. Our community is small, and there is so much I would like to do in terms of providing courses, conversation on the dark feminine, and extra content, so please consider joining at patreon.com/Chthonia. Now on to the podcast. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast that deals with the dark feminine. I'm Breach Burke, and as we're rounding out 2024 with our episodes, we're down, including today's, we're down to the last 4, so we will soon be having the 2025 list coming out, probably in early December. And I've told people who are on my social media and on my Patreon, of course, to let me know if they have any suggestions for what they want to do next year. I think I've already posted a list to Patreon subscribers already of what's on the list, and I know I discussed it in one of my live streams. So if you would like to contribute anything for 2025 that I have not yet covered, then feel free to, I will put the existing list out and you can feel free to add to it. Now today's topic is going to be the topic of Selkies. Okay, now Selkies are part of what we'll think of as being, I'm going to say, very Northern European folklore. You see Selkies referred to in Scotland. You see them referred to in Ireland. You see them referred to up in the Orkneys and the Shetlands, which are technically part of Scotland, really. I mean, as far as, or at least part of the UK. But Selkies are, they're a very particular type of fairy. And they are a female fairy that that is basically a seal woman, okay? They have seal skins, and because they are seals, what they do is they will come out of the water. They will the way the legend goes is that they will take their seal skin off so that they can dance on the land. And when they do that, if a particular man sees them, usually it's a fisherman or somebody like that who sees this beautiful woman, and he sneaks over and takes away her seal skin. And when he does that, then the woman, because she can't go back to the sea without her seal skin, then she ends up being forced to become the wife of whoever this was who stole the seal skin. Now, of course, in these legends, it's not as though the husband is one that treats the wife poorly, and she does her duty as wife, and she bears children, and which she seems to love, in all of them. In some stories, I should get to the ending of it. What happens in just pretty much all of these stories is that in some fashion, the woman is there's either a child who makes a comment about something, or the husband will unlock a chest to get dressed, and wherever it is, the location of the hidden seal skin will be found. And once the woman knows where it is, she goes, retrieves it, puts it back on, and slips back into the sea. Now, in some versions of the story, as I was starting to say before prematurely, is that the child will come with her. In other versions, the child stays behind. And one, I don't know. There's the one story that I remember of the Selkie that I saw in movie form is a film called The Secret of Rowan and Ish, and I actually saw that in graduate school. I was in a class on St. Patrick's writings and culture and time period. And I remember they had us watch this as part of it. And it is a very interesting movie, and certainly the imagery of it, of Ireland, of kind of old Ireland, is beautiful. So it's definitely worth watching just for that alone. But it is a rather interesting story where the idea of this one missing child that seems to be a Selkie child that ends up kind of running wild on, I don't want to say too much about that because don't want to spoil the ending for you, but it definitely centers around the idea of fairy children or Selkie children, the sons of the seal woman. you know. So there's a discussion of that that's not always presented very overtly, but sometimes very subtly in the film. And then, of course, you do see this story recounted. Now, it's not the first place I've heard of the Selkie myth. And now, unlike a lot of other fairy encounters, encounters with these seal women are often not considered to be hostile kinds of encounters. This is not the encounter with, one of the fairies that is like the Kelpie, where it's a horse that appears to the exhausted, wary traveler who thinks, "Oh, good, I can take this horse and get home faster," and instead the horse just drives him straight into the water and drowns him. And there's quite a bit of symbolism here that we see with the Selkie myth. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of specific stories, because the narrative that I just told you is pretty much what the narrative is. There may be some local differences about maybe where she finds the sealskin, or how, whether, like I said, whether she takes her children or whether she doesn't. But she's not a hostile being. She's actually a very lovely kind of being. She plays the role of submissive wife, but once she finds her sealskin, then she abandons that life and she returns to the water. So, what I'm going to talk about are a few things here. First of all, let's talk about the symbolism of the Selkie woman herself. What do we think she represents? Because she's a very clear archetype here. The second thing we want to look at is the act of stealing the sealskin, and also the fact that she comes from the sea. I think that is also something that is relevant, especially if we look at the broader context of fairy lore, the idea that she comes from the sea. And I think also what the recovery of the skin represents and her return to the water. I think every piece of this reflects something that we can identify with on some level of the human experience. That the part that is more connected to the heart space, I would say. So let's start with the fairy realm. Okay, let's start with what that is. And I've talked about it in many other podcasts, so I don't need to kind of go back and re-explain the fairy realm in totality. But I do want to say that the fairy realm does represent a place that is on a boundary. Okay, we tend to talk about the fairies coming out either at dusk or at dawn, or maybe they're dancing and singing through the night, and then when the dawn breaks, they disappear. They're definitely either night or liminal kinds of creatures. They represent something on a threshold. Certainly in later folklore about them, rather than being seen, they're seen as nature spirits, I guess. But they're also seen as the beings that are not good enough for heaven and not bad enough for hell, right? So they're kind of in this in-between place. And interestingly, some versions of the Selkie myth almost represent, almost similar to the idea of either hungry ghosts or this idea of these women who are in some way, there's this punishment after death by taking on a certain form. We think of the Rusalki in Slavic mythology, who at least one version of the Rusalki folklore is that the Rusalki is actually a woman who drowned herself, and therefore her punishment, she doesn't go to heaven, she becomes so she becomes a Rusalki and she roams the woods. Okay, and there have been, on occasion, this origin story attributed to the Selkie. But that one, like a lot of other ones, that one's fairly dubious. That's the Christianized version. And you're going to see a mixture of those things, but I think that the Selkie actually represents something more fundamental, and that is the feminine soul. Okay, now, we've talked a lot about Anima and Animus, okay, and the way in which masculine and feminine interact, and I think this is a really important thing right now, because I feel like we are moving towards a space where masculine and feminine are being encouraged to work together. Yeah, I know recent developments, I'm recording this at the election week of the U.S., that there's a lot of women who don't feel that way right now, but I do think that the overall tone and message has been, how do the masculine and feminine get back in balance? Not one dominating the other, not one crushing the other, and that goes in either direction, It's not about that. And I think what we've seen in Irish folklore, especially if we go back to the story of the Dearg Dua, which was the female vampire, there's this idea of women's sovereignty, and how one treats that feminine soul. Because remember, the anima is not the woman's soul. The females themselves are considered to be embodiments of the feminine in physical form, right? So as a woman, you already embody all the qualities of the anima just by virtue of your existence. The anima is that aspect of the man that identifies with the feminine. And so what Jung would say, and I realize in saying this, kind of put the little disclaimer in here, I do recognize that ideas about gender and sex and so forth are a little more complicated than Jung. It's not just simply, and I know there's still people out there who will say, well, there's men are men and women are women. And there's a lot of reasons why that may not exactly be the case, and especially in a time period where people who kind of, again, fall into those, I feel like they're falling in between the cracks or in those spaces that are not, that don't neatly fit into one category or the other. I don't want people to feel like, well, that particular situation has no place here, because it does. But it's a matter of how masculine and feminine is balanced within you. So generally, somebody who presents masculine generally has a soul that is considered to be feminine. And so if we just stick with that idea and not go in too much diversion from that, so if a man, when a man falls in love, I've talked about this before, there's the projection of the soul archetype. So he sees a woman, and in that woman, and what he perceives as beautiful and attractive in that woman reflects something that he sees in his soul. It is this idea of the woman as muse. Okay, when we talked about the Lennon she, Yeats's kind of potentially made up fairy, but nonetheless, the concept of this woman who drains the man of his life because he's desperately attracted to her, but there's some aspect of the relationship that isn't fulfilled in some way. And all of these stories relate to the relationship of the man. I'm trying to put man and anima together. I'm doing that a lot today. Man and anima. So the man and his anima, it's how do they come into relation with each other? And in society, the way that men treat women is a reflection of how they are connected or not to their anima. And so when you have stories of those who either mistreat the anima or are unable to understand her mystery or her riddles, and perhaps behave in an abusive way or in a controlling way, these particular male figures often get their comeuppance. Now, in this particular story, the Selkie, if we think about it, she comes from the water, okay? She comes from the sea. Now, the sea is the realm of the emotions. It's the realm of the collective unconscious. It's the realm of what is felt. As we talked about with the idea of water as being regressive rather than, it can be purifying as well if we think about it and say the way that it's used in baptisms or in rituals of cleansing or rebirth or things like that. But water can also be regressive when it is out of control, as we talked about in the Storm Hags episode. So you have this, in other words, out of the lovely depths emerges this beautiful woman who dances, right? She dances on the shore. And she puts her sealskin aside, which is the thing that allows her to exist in the water. By taking it off, then she can be a woman and exist on the land. So she is a kind of liminal creature. She's on the boundary. She can be both a water creature and she can be an earth creature. And similarly, the idea of the feminine in the sense of the anima is that the woman, can exist, and this dancing suggests something that's physical and something that's very sensual. But also from coming out of the realm of the intuitive and the emotional. So as I said, the Selkie is very archetypal in what she represents. She does not seem to represent the dark feminine per se, and I realize this is a podcast of the dark feminine, but certainly the depth she comes from, she certainly would know something about that. She is definitely connected to that realm of dark mystery, but just not necessarily in a hostile sense. As I've mentioned, dark feminine does not have to be hostile and angry feminine. Okay, this could just be something that comes out of that mysterious and hidden realm. So what happens? So the fisherman comes and takes the seal skin away. So what does he do? Okay, if we think of the seal skin as that which allows her to function in the intuitive and emotional space, there's a removing of that. So now she is lost. She is abandoned. She's on land. She can't connect with her people, with her ancestry, with where she comes from. And this man takes her home, this strange woman, to be his wife. So now she is in the realm of producing his children and keeping his house for him and basically being submissive to him because he's the only anchor she has in this world. Okay, so now she is, and again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the man who takes her in mistreats her in the sense of beating her or abusing her or anything like that, but it's about what he wants and not about where she wants to be. In staying with this man, and even if we wanted to assume that the Selkie falls in love with the man, okay, even if we want to go that far and say, well, let's just say it was a happy marriage and that they loved each other, okay, we'll take that for argument's sake. There's still the sense that the woman is unmoored. She doesn't have access to her soul. Her soul has been locked away in a chest. Now, this is a really, really powerful metaphor, as far as I'm concerned, for what happens to the soul, what happens to the heart. There's been a lot of talk lately, and I do a lot this kind of work over on Transition Life Coaching, which is my other channel. A lot of work around opening of the heart. Now, I've said that opening the heart is the most difficult thing to do. It is extremely easy to close your heart. It is very easy to, cross your arms across your chest and say, go F yourself, I hate you, and I don't want anything to do with you. Even though that can be painful, there can also be an empowerment in that rage. You're going to betray me, well then F you. I'm taking my ball and go home, and in the I don't know, suppose you could interpret that another way, right? But in the most in the broadest sense of the term, I mean, you're basically saying, right, there's a separation now. There's going to be a disconnect between the masculine and feminine because you don't know how to appropriately treat the feminine. You treat the feminine like it's something that needs to submit to you. You treat the feminine like it's your property. And again, sovereignty being the central thing here. So by taking the seal skin really does represent the woman's sovereignty. It represents her freedom to express her heart, her freedom to be authentically who she is. Because authentically, she's a seal woman. She's not a human wife. But she has to, because her seal skin has been taken away from her, now she has to function as a human being. And again, I think it's interesting in these myths that it's not that the woman is always in some terrible situation. It's not like the Derg-du where she's kind of locked in a tower and starving to death and being abused, being beaten by her husband or trotted out like some kind of a thing, like a trick pony or something. And it doesn't have to be that kind of a situation. It can be a situation where the man feels that he feels love and he feels that this is the way he needs to connect to his soul. By putting her in this submissive place, by putting the heart piece of her away and just making her about, and kind of leaving her to be subject to him, to the world of the intellect, to the world of the masculine that says, you're here to create a structure and a space for me. You're here to make my home. You're here to continue my family line. These are all very patriarchal things. These are all the things that the woman is expected to do. And it's not clear to us from these stories whether she's unhappy in this situation. Because, as we've noted, when you fall in love with somebody, you may voluntarily get into that kind of a situation. You may say, yes, I do want to be married, and I do want to have a family, and I do want to be part of this. But something is always given up in the process of doing that. Your freedom to play in the waves and dance on the beach is no longer there in this kind of a setting. And when the woman finds the sealskin, either a child mentions it, so okay, now we have a child who manages to reconnect her to her original soul in some fashion, or her husband, in slipping up, she manages to find the opening to steal her skin back, and then she goes out among the waves, and she might take her children with her, and she might not, because fundamentally, even though she loves her children, I mean, in these stories, the seal woman always loves her child, but ultimately, that may be something that's left behind, because that may not be who she is. If she's come to identify with that role and has integrated that role, then perhaps the child will come with her. But then the human family loses the child. Okay? So it can go both ways. I don't know. I don't want to spoil the secret of Rowan and Ish, because I can tell you the way it goes in that story, but I probably will just leave it alone in case that's something you want to see. But there's a different variation there, and sometimes it's about how human children need to be with their human families, whereas the soul has its own place. And it's about when you take the soul and try to tame it into the mother archetype, and you try to make the Anima into the mother. And I've talked about this with falling in love, and I've said that this has often been the unconscious problem in marriages. That when a man and a woman get married, okay, and we're just going to stick with that example, for now, understanding that there are other types of marriages and relationships and so forth. When they get married, I've talked about how I don't want to say in all, but in many cases, what happens is that the man becomes, how do I want to put it? The man is, the woman, okay, this beautiful Anima figure that he fell in love with now assumes a different archetypal role. She becomes mother. So there's the expectation there that she is going to manage certain things, that she's going to fix up certain things. She's going to bake cookies and dry tears and hold babies in her lap, and make the man feel happy and restful after his day at work. You hear about the 1950s housewife shtick, right? But the problem is that's the role she's forced into, because she's no longer in her element. Regaining the sealskin is really about regaining her own sovereignty. And it doesn't always mean that she loses connection with her human family. But once she's got it back, then the man has lost her. And that's often perceived of as a kind of a loss for him. Like, oh, you took a fairy wife and now she's gone. And this can, you can view this as the inconstancy of the feminine. Hence, it seems like people's need to try to put it in a box or lock it in a room or put a ring on it to keep it in place. But I think fundamentally it demonstrates one of the ways in which men engage with the feminine. There's many, many different mythologies and folktales about how men engage with their own souls. Greek mythology is rife with them, and that's where you see all of these witch figures who appear, and the way in which these heroes have to negotiate these witch figures, sometimes through conquering them, sometimes through defeating their spells, sometimes by working with them. We see a lot of cases of betrayal, for example, in the case of Medea, and Medea punishes by destroying the children. But all of these are about the way in which the masculine who is emerging in this world, when the masculine child is young, they engage, in theory, they engage with the mother. Now, again, in real life, there are men who grow up without mothers, or maybe grow up in a single family household, or there's all kinds of different permutations. Maybe they have two dads, maybe they have two moms. There's all kinds of different permutations, okay? But if we stick with the archetypal idea, there's somebody onto whom mother archetype is projected, whoever that person ends up being. And so that is the first experience of the feminine for the male. When that child gets older and goes into their own, goes into puberty, goes into that stage in which they become attracted to whomever they're going to become attracted to, however that projection is going to work. If we are talking about somebody who is attracted to the feminine, okay, we'll just say men attracted to the feminine, or just whoever's attracted to the feminine, then the feminine takes a new form, and that is the form of the anima. The anima is that's what's grown up out of the mother image, right? That the anima is the one who is the lover, the mysterious one, the one who you're attracted to, the one who the soul. When you encounter the soul archetype as projected into another person, that's the person that makes your heart sing, that makes you feel like, you have to look your best and act your best and everything because you want to impress this person, right? This is the person you want to, you want to be intimate with. It's not just, oh, hey, you'd make a cool friend. It's like, it's a person you would, want to share your space with, that you feel that chemistry with. For some people, that this can be the person who inspires them. Okay, that they write, if they write music or poetry or whatever kind of whatever they do artistically, having a female who inspires them. Unrequited love can also be a kind of inspiration. The woman who is unattainable, because to a certain extent that is the anima. She feels like the unattainable woman. And what this does is this puts the man, and we're just going to use that. I'm just going to say the man. I'm not going to get into all the permutations. Let's just say that this puts the man in a position of disempowerment. And this is where Freud would talk about things like castration anxiety and so forth, right? The idea that they are emasculated because somehow the phallus has come to represent their strength. Hence the focus on things like large phalluses and things like that, which are, anyway, well, I won't go down that. I won't go down that avenue. But this is part of gun culture too. I mean, there's this idea of this kind of phallic symbol that symbolizes power and force and authority. Even the scepter, perhaps, that's held by a king. There's this kind of idea of this being a kind of a force or a representation of one's authority and one's power and one's status in the world. And then when you have the woman who comes in who can make you feel like a pile of mush, then it's almost like you have been, you may crave that person and desire that person, but now you are in submission to her when you are in love. So when that person gets married, then it's almost like, okay, now I have conquered this feminine force and I have put it into submission. This is the beautiful fairy woman, mysterious fairy woman dancing on the shores. I've taken away her Selkie skin. And now she is the one who is powerless and must submit to me. And the fact that these stories always end the way they do tell you something about the way one relates to the anima. Well, let's just say to the anima. The animus, I think, has some other... there's some other extra baggage attached to the female projection of the animus, but if we just go with that particular symbolism, the Selkie is definitely the image of the woman who has to take on this kind of submissive role, really against her will. It's not like she gave the sealskin to the fisherman. The fisherman stole it. Okay, and hid it from her and said, I have it now, so I have the key to your power. You might think of that as a woman who falls hopelessly in love with a man and is willing to do anything for him, or could even represent a kind of social idea that says, as a woman, you are supposed to do everything you can to be desirable to a man and to please them, right? But the thing is, the idea is that the woman, even if she submits and does everything and basically makes the man happy, or at least makes him satisfied that he has the family life that he wants, and whether or not that's always happy, I mean, these are fairy tales, so I mean, who knows what the real level of happiness is? That's generally not gotten into in any kind of granular degree. But even if we want to assume that it's basically a happy or a comfortable relationship, there's still the idea that the woman is still looking to retrieve her lost piece of her soul, her sovereignty. She's still looking to retrieve it. And at a certain point, there's some event that allows her to rediscover it. Now, it's hard to say, just because of the nature of these stories, what these things represent, like finding it in a chest or finding it hidden in an attic somewhere. That could be where she encounters it through the intellect, right? If it's hidden in an attic, when we look at archetypal symbolism or dream symbolism, the attic often represents the upper floors, the intellect, what's hidden on the upper mind. The unconscious tends to be what's in the basement, right? But that tends to be what's in the upper echelons, is what is in the higher realms of thinking. So that could be what we think of as spiritual thinking. It could be what we think of as, again, as the intellect, as rationality, as philosophy, these kinds of higher ways of thinking that perhaps through that, she might also be able to rediscover her heart. My thinking is it's probably more through a spiritual connection. But then again, that's not always where it's hidden. Sometimes, in one story in particular, the sealskin was hidden in a chest with the man's clothes. So what does the chest represent? We also see the chest motif in flood mythology. When now Noah has an ark, okay, but oftentimes, in the story, for instance, of Danae and Perseus, okay, Perseus is the hero who ends up beheading Medusa and is sort of the grandfather of, I want to say of Heracles, but I think he's this great hero who retrieves Medusa's head and marries the princess Andromeda. But Perseus, as a child, his mother Danae is the daughter of King Acrisius of Argos, and he locks her up in a tower. He's not going to let her, he's the father who is going to control the daughter. But Zeus appears to her as a shower of gold, and he mates with her. And of course, when she becomes pregnant, King Acrisius does not believe for a minute that his daughter was visited by Zeus, and takes her and the baby and locks them in a chest and throws them out into the sea. But the sea, but Zeus decrees that it will land very safely on the island. And when it, I'm trying to remember the name of the island now. I want to say, I keep thinking like Delos, but it's not Delos. It's got that kind of a name, but I can't remember off the top of my head. In any case, they land on this island, and then they're rescued there, and he's raised by a shepherd, and this goes into the hero myth narrative. But nonetheless, there's this idea of the chest and being locked in the chest and being thrown out to sea, being kind of adrift, or that one is rescued from the terrors of the sea by hiding in a chest. We see that with Deucalion and Pyrrha as well. There's this idea of it's almost like that's kind of a boat that is the kind of equivalent of the ark or some other kind of craft like that. That one can hide inside of it and not drown. So there's definitely this idea of within that space, within that man constructed kind of an ark. There's a way for her to find her heart again and find her sovereignty again. And there does seem to be a connection between the two, because like I said, this is what allows you to easily navigate the waters. This is what allows you to be open, to be receptive. This is what allows you to fully be in your heart space as the person who you are. And that's a very difficult thing to do. It's very difficult to be able to swim, right? We're all okay with walking on land. We're all okay with what we think of as the kind of normal workings of society, but we're not comfortable. The realm, the dry land of consciousness, right? But we're not able to enter the waters of unconsciousness. So, and not we don't feel that we can do it safely. We have to have some kind of a vehicle or a vessel to bring us there. And so that becomes her vessel. And so once she puts her sealskin back on, now she can return to where she was. Doesn't mean the man never sees her again. Doesn't mean the children never see her again. And in some cases, she takes the children with her. But I think it's a very interesting kind of narrative that talks about women and the idea of soul and the idea of sovereignty and how masculine and feminine need to connect with each other, because this is the typical way of doing it. And it's not even considered, like I said, this is not a story of hostility. This is not a story of outright beating and abuse and, locking somebody in a tower or something. There's almost this implication that this new wife accepts her new role and accepts it without complaint or without difficulty. But it's more of a secret thing that she harbors, that she wants to go home. She wants to go back to her own roots, to where she was. And it says, I think there's a commentary here on the whole concept of marriage, because I think masculine and feminine can come together. But to come together in such a space without sovereignty, there's always has to be a yielding of the woman's sovereignty, which is not something she really truly wants to give up. And I think this is another version of that kind of story. And it's so interesting to me that in a lot of the folklore of Ireland, of Scotland, and of kind of northern places, and they're not, again, it's not the only place. Like I just said, we did see things in Greek mythology. I'm sure you see examples of this in other folk tales and other legends as well. But the fairy stories in particular, it's kind of about being on this boundary, and this boundary between the kind of unconscious feminine depths and what we think of as the rational masculine. I mean, yeah, she's walking on the dry earth, and of course, earth is something else that we think of as feminine. But the feminine earth is something. It's like a different kind of a space. It's a different type of existence that we see. Like I said, it's not that she despises the dry earth. She comes there. What does she come there for? She comes there to dance. Okay. And dancing, of course, ends up having all kinds of connections to sexuality and sensuality and things like that. But you can also look at that as, okay, she's the woman who wants to dance on dry land and thus show off her sensuality. And this becomes a cue for the man to say, oh, she's there parading herself in front of me. I can take that. Right. So I don't know. I think these stories can be very instructive about the feminine and dealing with the feminine and what the meaning of or the consequences are of certain ways of relating to the feminine. And I think one of the things that men, well, maybe they're trying to learn, maybe they're not. I don't feel like in this day and age, we've been in such a divisive space. We have these concepts of these people who call themselves like alpha males and other kinds of bullshit like that, who it's just kind of, it's all about, I'm going to beat you into submission. And then you hear about men who say, oh, well, these women who walk around and, they're saying, screw you, I don't need you. You have the whole idea of the incel movement and things like that. Now, again, this is not by any stretch of the imagination all men, but this is the kind of extremes that we tend to see. And even in men who are not quite that extreme, you will see a lot of cases where they will get into a relationship with the woman and, they'll say, oh yeah, everything was fine for a while until some particular thing will come out and he will betray his kind of expectation that, she's property or that she has to be in a certain condition or maintain a certain thing in order for her to be acceptable, in order for her to be loved. And that's the point at which she says, okay, women nowadays, they might be heartbroken, but they'll say, well, okay, well, that's it. I'm done. Goodbye. I'm leaving you. I'm taking my sealskin and jumping back into the ocean. But it may not even be that, because like I said, it's not that the heart isn't necessarily given voluntarily. But women often lose their heart, not only when they get put in a marriage situation, and it happens far too often, far more often than it should, when they always say that a woman has to give up in order to be in a relationship, a woman has to give up relationship. In other words, the man, she's there, he wants to hang out with his friends and watch football and do whatever, and she's there to like mind the kitchen and stuff, and when she wants to talk about something or talk about feelings, he's just like, leave me alone. I've seen that, and again, does not happen in all relationships. Happens far more often than it should. And then a woman feels betrayed. She feels like she's left adrift, What am I going to do, with the heart? So the heart ends up having to be put away in a chest, so to speak. Has to be put away if she wants to maintain that relationship. If she takes it out again, then she has to set herself free. And that, unfortunately, becomes the conundrum that we see in this story. How can you come into a relationship? There's got to be a different way to do it. Doing it this way, even if there's a lot of aspects of the relationship that don't seem as offensive or as abusive, you could argue that the very fact that he stole the sealskin is an abuse. Okay, but it's not so much, and we have stories like that where the story of Atalanta and Hippolytus, like when there's her father will only let her marry anyone who can defeat her in a foot race. She runs. And what he does is he's given, by Aphrodite, gives him 3 golden apples that he basically throws to distract her so that he can beat her in the race. In other words, you can only win by trickery. This seems to be the way the soul works. We get tricked into things. Persephone, with Hades, he tricked me into eating the pomegranate seed, which, it's hard to see how there was any trickery there. But now I feel like that to him, I feel like I love him. It's like falling in love is a kind of tricksterish kind of thing. And that makes sense, too, if we look at the trickster archetype. The trickster archetype is not something that... it doesn't operate in logical, planned, straight lines. That's why it's the trickster. It's the chaotic thing that comes in and messes everything up. Think about if you've had your life plan, and then all of a sudden you meet somebody and fall in love, and now it's like there's people who are just willing to throw everything away for that. I know I did it when I was younger. And that was a big mistake. But, hindsight's 20/20, as they say. But yeah, like, how does it, that kind of feeling, the way that the soul works, it doesn't work through logic. It doesn't work through reason. And if you try to, the only way that people seem to know how to manage it is to try to beat it into submission. But it's like, that's not really the way to work with the heart. Because then you do kind of permanent damage to it, and you do damage to our ability to connect with each other. And that's not the way this is ever supposed to work. But we still live in a culture, and I think we're starting to move away from it, but I think it's going to be a very long time before we see broad cultural results, I think. When you start seeing misogyny go away entirely, I think in the meantime, you still have this idea of women who are now sick of playing that role, sick of giving up the sealskin, so to speak. But at the same time, then, we also dealing with a situation where potentially there's no connection. There is definitely an importance in being independent and being who you are. But oftentimes the best relationships are the ones where you have 2 people who can be who they are and both be sovereign. It's not like one is the property of the other one. Although marriage is kind of one of those things where you make the commitment to say, yeah, we're just going to be together and not with anybody else. Even in those kind of settings, the question is, are you working together and are you supporting each other? And are you allowing and supporting and respecting each of you as an independent human being, but working together? That's the only way that really can work. And there has to be an acceptance of the person. And again, I'm not talking about accepting narcissistic people, abusive people, psychotic people. I mean, I'm not talking about accepting those kinds of relationships. I'm saying, we need to learn how to connect with people. I always say it comes down to respect and to trust. But it needed to be connecting to people in a way that it's like that person is, you often feel when you fall in love, like you want to meld with that person, right? You want to be in their presence, you want to breathe their aroma, but that doesn't last. And that's kind of the point. You have to let it be free. That's really what sovereignty is about. In order for something to flourish, in order for real love to flourish, there has to be freedom. And there has to be freedom on both sides. And freedom doesn't mean we never speak to each other. You go do your thing, I go do mine, and never the twain shall meet. That's also not a relationship. It's where we have our places where we meet, but we're also free to be the people who we are. And, where if somebody, it's not like, oh, okay, well, you were going to have a career, but now you got to stay home and take care of the kids. See, that's not, the expectation of that. I mean, sometimes people do make different sacrifices depending on their circumstances, but that's kind of what ends up happening there. You have the woman who now is adrift. She's now maybe separated from her identity or for what makes her unique. And now all she is here to submit and maybe spending her time secretly or privately hoping to find that sealskin again, that sense of her sovereignty that allows her to move between the land and the water, that allows her to find her heart again. And again, it's not necessarily saying it's a space where she wants to be alone or doesn't want to be loved, but not in the sense of being trapped, not in the sense of being told your freedom is now, that's the thing you're giving up to have this relationship. That's why they have all the jokes about the old ball and chain. But the thing is, oftentimes those jokes are for the man. Oh, see, now she's got you trapped. You see that with the men, but the women also can be trapped. People are not possessions. And that's at least some of the takeaway that I have here. So it's a matter of, the kind of idea that the soul is happiest when it's free. And if you want to dance with the soul, if you want to retain that connection to the soul, it has to be free to do what it's going to do. And also, the last thing I'm going to mention here that's worth remembering is that the Anima is not your partner. If you're married, if you're a man who's married, your wife is not the Anima. And she's not your mom either, by the way. She's not an archetype. She's a human being. You have to be able to understand the difference between your projection of the archetype and the person. Because if people don't, then what happens is you get married, your wife turns into mom, and you continue to look for the Anima elsewhere because you want the thrill of that mystery, of that chase, and you don't ever find the satisfaction, you don't ever really connect with your soul because you're not making that connection and showing the care and respect that would allow her to be free enough to do the things that she could do for you, or that your own internal soul could do for you, the kinds of creative ways in which that can manifest in you. Having children is only one way to create. I mean, you can have that soul relationship, but you have to recognize that in doing so, how does one do so without compromising the sovereignty of somebody else? To be married is already to compromise your sovereignty in the sense of it's not like you're going to date other people. People who get into polygamous relationships, if you're looking for any kind of stability, I mean, maybe people with polygamous relationships don't care about having stability. I mean, which is okay. But people who I hear about being in marriages that are open, for example, I'm like, that never quite works so well. Because often what happens is that one person is free to do things and the other one's not. So, I don't know. Or at least that there's bad feelings about it. So, I don't know. I feel like this is a folk tale that deals with a lot of complexity of emotions around how do men negotiate the feminine. And about what that does to the feminine. And so you could look at a woman who seems like she's perfectly happy, who then kind of flies and people go, wait, what happened? Well, her sovereignty is more important, and and opening up to freedom. That's what a lot of people do. And then there's people who don't want freedom either. They would rather be in that confined space. They would rather, submit to that space because to be free and on your own path can also be tricky. Okay, if you take it too seriously, if you don't know how to dance, but also when you're trying to navigate a society that says you should not do that. So then frequently it's almost like a punishment, like, okay, well now you're free, well fine, now you are on your own. And the kind of connection you find has to be found elsewhere in other places, maybe away from family, or maybe in the company of other people. But if you want that kind of love connection, if you want the soul connection with somebody, or to encounter that soul connection through another person, this is kind of the delicate balance that you have to strike. The balance in order to find balance with masculinity and femininity, there has to be sovereignty. So that's it for me for this week. I know this one's a little bit more on the depth psychology side than talking so much about the history of the myth, but there's not a whole lot around the tale itself other than the different iterations of it that we hear. So I think the psychological component's definitely the more important one here, or the one that really stands out. So thank you so much for listening. If you do want to support the work that I do, please consider subscribing at patreon.com/Chthonia. If you want to see all my work, check out my website, Chthonia.net. I did just do a recent update. In fact, I did it today. And if you want to see what I've been up to, I certainly updated the publications page, and I also updated the school page. I do now have the Institute for the Study of Feminine Myth. We are going to be wrapping up fall term 2024, but you still can get recordings of previous classes if you want to. And we will also be soon putting out the list for spring 2025, probably in December, and that semester may not start till late February, early March, but there will be a spring 2025 to follow this one up. So if that interests you, check out instituteforfemininemyth.org. If you want to follow me on social media, I have Chthonia Podcast, just one word, on Instagram and Facebook. I no longer have an X account. So those two places, and it's at Chthonia Podcast, one word. And also on YouTube, if you do youtube.com/@Chthonia Podcast, one word, you will find my channel. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.